Doc here, the Physics of Sound Music, a review of Chapter P, which is our first chapter on the modular synthesizer. So, we dedicate these two classes, P and Q, to Bob Moog, one of the inventors of the synthesizer, who was a member of the Asheville community here for 25 years. He came to Asheville when I came back in 1978, and he taught a physics course at one time. He was involved with the music department, and he was just such a cool guy to have and an inspiration for all of us. He passed away in 2005. So here we look at the 5 waveforms that we studied in our course earlier: the sine wave, the triangle wave, the square, the ramp, and the pulse. And I've arranged these in terms of their richness. These have here more Fourier components, more upper partials. In fact, the pulse train has all the harmonics, and this is one single harmonic. So the simpler sounding wave here, simple beauty and rich beauty, all very, very nice, those 5 waveforms. So the first module here is the VCO. Now we choose a circle for the VCO since it's an oscillator, and oscillators, you may have noticed when I take a circle and put a little sine wave in there for my generator in the previous chapter, that's the same idea. So a circle is used for something that produces something that we can hear. All right, that's going to be our idea convention for the synthesizer. So here, simple module. Beauty of the modular synthesizer is that each module does a little bit, and then you put them together to get the effect. So here you have the voltage control. You send in a voltage and out comes a pitch. Simple, that's it. So here you could say from 0 to 5 volts, out comes frequencies that go from essentially no frequency to up to 16,000 hertz or 16 kilohertz. I had a synthesizer, still do, that actually does that. It was a kit that I built for the 1980s. So here you have 0 to 5 volts, but you don't need to remember that because different synthesizers would have different voltages, but just think of some range of voltage here. You stick a battery on there, 1.5 volt battery, this thing sings. You then put 2 batteries together to make it like a flashlight. You put them one after another in series. You have 3 volts. This one sings at a higher pitch. So just think of that. And then if you have a power supply in physics where you dial in the various voltages, then you can get the various pitches. The next module is the keyboard. We want to be able to interact with the synthesizer, and the keyboard is a very, very popular device to do that. So the keyboard, now this is a control voltage. It's going to control, say, the VCO, for example. We have a rectangle. A rectangle is used for the control. Notice also that there's another convention I use here, and that is the audio signals, the signals that eventually you hear when you put this to a house system that has an amplifier and speaker. I always make these going from west to east. We're heading east. We're going to the Atlantic Ocean from where we are in the mountains of North Carolina. We're going east. All the voltage controls, I make their arrows here going north. See, so the controllers are going to be down here in the basement, and up here in the second story you're going to have the audio signal pathway. So remember that. It's helpful to understand this synthesizer as we build it. So for the keyboard, we have the voltage that comes out. Different keys that you press give different voltages. So a key down to the left here, low note, will have a low voltage, and that'll make the VCO sing a low pitch. And then here at the top, it'll be higher pitches. We need another control, and that is to know when the key is pressed or not. That's called the trigger voltage, and this is either on or off. So you can think of this as like 0 volts when you're not pressing the key, and when you press the key you get, say, like 1 volt or something. Notice that here the last key you pressed and then you go out and have lunch, there's still that voltage going up here. This one goes dead because you let go of the key, but this one still goes up there. That's called the sample and hold feature. So the controlled voltage continues after you release the key. That's important because we want to control that in terms of some attack and release that's coming up in another section. So that's your keyboard here. So then we move on to seeing how these work together. Now this VCO, if you ask about the various waveforms, you can think of having switches here where you have that sine wave, the various waves I showed you here. You can think of switches. In the Moog synthesizer, you'll have like a square wave, a pulse. You have some of these, and then you use filters to filter things out to get those two. So you can imagine our synthesizer that we're making conceptually for this course is having like these 5 controls. That you have a sine, you have a triangle, square, ramp, and pulse train. So we do that here, not being shown. So here, if you want, you could say, for example, and later in the course I do this, I don't write VCO, but I write a little triangle here, or a ramp, and that lets you know what I'm picking there as my VCO starting waveform. Or you can do a little cute, say, square down in here. So I'm going to use a square wave to communicate. For now, just keep this like this in general. So here is the setup. The keyboard is here going into the VCO. I hit different notes and I get different singing of the VCO, and if I go out and have lunch, this still sings the last note that I have pressed, because that's your sample and hold, and I'm not using the trigger. So we move on to the amplifier. Now in electronics, a triangle is used for a modifier, where an audio signal comes in and we modify it in some way, goes out. So that means that the VCA needs, a triangle needs to have an audio signal in and an audio signal going out, and something here to tell it how much to do. In this case, how loud to make it. If this voltage is higher, then I turn the amplifier up. And we want electronics to do this for us so that it can turn it up in a split second and get a plucking sound. So notice that here, if we do detective work, critical thinking here, you can never have a signal coming from left into the VCO. And sometimes on test questions, when we're testing to see if you understand the fundamentals, if you know this unit, you have a voltage coming in and you have the audio signal produced going out. There's nothing, see, going into the left. And here, for your control voltages, basically they're going to go up. Here I came out the right, but I turned it so it goes up north. So they're control voltages. And then here you see that you have your VCO as a source, a circle as a source. It doesn't need any signal coming in. It produces it. But the triangle needs to have a signal coming in and a signal going out. That's your amplifier control. Just imagine like opening a door or something, let more people in, or close a door, less can get through. So it's a loudness control. So here's how we can put the 3 together. Now here, when you press a note, then this trigger goes high, turns the amplifier on all the way, loud, right, all the way, and then you hear a pitch determined by which key you pressed. You let go of the key, then you still have your voltage going up here, you still have the VCO singing, but you've just shut the VCA off, because if this goes dead, you just close the door. So you hear nothing, and that goes to the house system, always understood to the far right. Well, we want to be able to change the attack and release of a sound. We have here the attack, how quick the sound begins, if it begins abruptly or gradually. And here you have the release, which is how the sound ends. And we have neat applets for you to play with where you can make these sounds. So here, an abrupt attack and an abrupt release is a staccato sound, like just simply clap your hand. Staccato. If you have an abrupt beginning and a gradual release, that's explosive. If you have a gradual beginning and an abrupt end, that's a sucking sound. And if you have gradual, you're swishing around. Or think of like ocean waves, like coming in and out gradually. So this is a 2-part model of sound, just attack and release. We're going to do a 4-part model of sound here next, where we have an attack and release, but something in between. We have an attack, an immediate decay, and then a sustained level, and then finally a release. This 4-part model is very powerful in synthesizers, and it gets a lot done. So many sounds can be made. And think of it as an envelope. Here I have a square wave, which I tuck inside my envelope, and I am controlling here the amplitude. I'm making it louder, and then I'm backing it off a little bit softer, and here I'm holding this as a sustain, and then release. And you can figure here that this is going to be when the key is pressed. If the key and stays down. When you press the key, the electronics will do this and this rapidly for you, and based on previous settings that you set. And then here, if the key is held down, it'll stay there for an hour if you want to hold your finger on the key for an hour. And when you release it, then electronics kicks in and gives you that. So here's your attack, decay, sustain, release diagram again. And we have a unit that does this, and we're going to call that unit the ADSR. Also called the envelope generator, since it's an envelope. It makes an envelope, but generator is kind of a bad term for it because it's basically here going to control this amplitude. It's not really going to generate its own sound. So, but it's called that in the field, sometimes called the envelope generator. So here it is. It takes a trigger signal coming in, and it goes through its routine. It goes through an attack, a decay, and then if you have the key pressed, that's where the trigger is important. It'll keep the sustain going, and then you let go, it releases. Notice that the attack you set, think of these four knobs under here. You set the attack. Do you want a split second, thousandth of a second, or you want a more gradual sound like an oboe? They take a quarter of a second or so, or the plucking sound of a banjo. You set that here ahead of time. Your decay is your immediate decrease to a sustain level here that you then set a time. So this is the time set, and then this would no, this is sustain is not a time set. That's where you hold the key down. That's a voltage set. Your time set's your A, your attack, how much time for your decay. And then here you control that when you play the instrument. You control the sustain. So that's a voltage level. That's setting the voltage level for how loud it's going to be. And then there's a time set for the resistor. Let's look at that carefully. It's a little bit subtle. So here you set the attack time ahead of time, and this will then turn that sound on by the amplifier very, very quickly. This is set a time again, but this time frame here you determine when you play the instrument. You hold the key down, that's your sustain. So you're really setting here how high this is, the sustain level, how high. And then here you set a time for the release. Okay, so then we put them all together. You get this nice setup here. You play a key. You get a voltage up here. It gives you a pitch. This sings a pitch. Here, the key that's pressed, say, hey, it's time to fire up. Go through your attack, decay, and if I'm still holding, keep sustaining. I'm still holding, and then when I release, then you do your release, and then you don't hear the sound anymore, although it's still here because the sample won't hold. Well, that's nice to see how they all fit together. And the last one's for modulation. It's a low frequency control oscillator. Now, oscillators used here, unfortunately, but because you don't hear this, it's not audio sound, we give it the box. It's going to control something, so we give it a rectangle. It goes from 0 to 25 hertz, basically sub-human hearing frequencies. And when you do that, it adds a little wiggling voltage here to give you a vibrato. So this changes your frequency slightly up and down. You can change here the amount. For singers, vibrato is typically 6 hertz, 6 times a second. So here I have the tremolo effect. I've simplified things here so to emphasize the modulation. If you have an amplifier, you're opening and closing and it's turning on and up, volume down, just wiggle up and down, you get, see, loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, soft. That's called tremolo in music. And if you have a pitch that you're changing to frequency, you have a vibrato. So the low frequency oscillator, see, modulating the amplitude here, you have amplitude modulation, which is tremolo in musical terms, and here you do frequency modulation. So I have stripped down to the simplest circuits or synthesizer diagram here to illustrate the modulation. So this is how you would do it if you're playing a song or playing something with it. You would have your basic arrangement we had before with the 4, and just simply put the LFO in here so that these voltages, see, will sum, they add, and this says, hey, we're going to go a little bit louder for whatever you're doing here, and a little bit softer, a little bit louder, a little bit softer, and that gives you that tremolo effect. And for the next diagram here, we have the basic arrangement the VCO, the keyboard, the ADSR, and VCA, and we just bring the LFO in here, and the voltage is add. Whatever pitch I'm hitting here, this is saying, hey, go a little bit higher, go a little bit lower, go a little bit higher. It gets a little wobbling effect there in the frequency, and that's called the vibrato. So that does it. Here we have a little exercise, some questions, but that's part one of the modular synthesizer.